Hello, and welcome to a very special Thanksgiving episode of my series, Battle Royale. Today we're going to be doing a 13 Colonies Battle Royale. For those of you who aren't American, these are just the first 13 states that existed. And I have the rest of the country here for no particular reason. I just think it's cool, and also the map I came with started with this. So yeah, let's get right into it. South Carolina will be making an alliance. Massachusetts. This will be the Purple Alliance, and Massachusetts at this point actually also controlled Maine, and I forgot that New York also controlled Vermont. Uh, we'll see where this alliance takes them. New Jersey will be invading. Southwest. So New Jersey will actually be invading into Delaware, and their purpose in doing this is they want to take it over. And unfortunately for Delaware, New Jersey is way more powerful than them and is easily able to do it. So Delaware was the first state in the Union, and it'll be the first state out of the Union. New Jersey will be invading Northwest. So their next target is Pennsylvania. And New Jersey is actually able to catch Pennsylvania a bit off guard, and because of that, they actually pretty quickly capture Philadelphia, which is an important city in Pennsylvania, the most important city. But Pennsylvania is holding out, and obviously they're going to start mobilizing their military to help out. But New Jersey has a secret tactic in store, which is that they also had Maryland on their side. Maryland wanted Delaware to go away for certain reasons, and they're very happy that this development occurred. So Maryland will start an invasion of Pennsylvania that Pennsylvania was not expecting, managing to get a lot of Pennsylvanian territory. And at this point, Pennsylvania is really angry, but they're still stronger than New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland combined, so they're still going to have no problems fighting these guys off. And eventually, things are going to start turning against the invading coalition, and Maryland will surrender, but New Jersey will refuse and keep going. Eventually, when New Jersey is thinking of surrendering, New York will join in on the war just to get some land out of it, and they'll invade to here. And at this point, the government of New Jersey is nowhere to be found, which means that even though they officially send a letter saying they're surrendering, New York and Pennsylvania don't actually believe that. They just don't know what happened, and so they end up just dividing the state up between them. North Carolina will be facing a rebellion, and this is a rebellion against the governor of North Carolina, who really doesn't like the pacifist route and kind of wants North Carolina to become expansionist. The rebellion will actually start way out west, where expansionist tendencies are way higher in this period, because this takes place during the 1770s, probably. So the rebellion is mostly focused there, but some areas in the east, notably in the southeast of the state, want it. And some rumors come about that South Carolina is actually funding the rebellion. And at first, the government doesn't believe it, but the government is getting overrun. So yeah, eventually the governor's mansion is seized, and the governor is forced to resign as the rebellion takes over the state. Shortly after this, the governor of South Carolina will declare war on the new government of North Carolina for being illegitimate, and start an invasion into the state. And North Carolina wasn't expecting this. And their new government is not popular enough to stop it, as a lot of the military refuses to fight or just isn't good at fighting. And North Carolina just got out of a bloody civil war, which makes things worse. To make things even worse, the old government starts popping back up. The old governor, who resigned but is still alive, pops up, and a lot of people in the east are supporting him. And he starts to gain support. So then the governor is executed to ensure that that doesn't lead to anything. However, at this point, the revolutionary government is also not very popular, and in fact is just gone. And at this point, there's not really a government in North Carolina, allowing South Carolina to easily take it all over. So here's what it looks like. Georgia will be making an alliance, which indirectly means an alliance with South Carolina. And obviously the reason they're doing this is because they don't want South Carolina to attack them the way they just infiltrated and attacked North Carolina very systematically. South Carolina was very skilled in taking out North Carolina. Georgia doesn't want them to have any of them, so they signed an agreement with them. New Hampshire is invading east. New Hampshire doesn't like what the Purple Alliance is doing, so they try getting a coalition of states to at least take down Massachusetts to weaken South Carolina. And a coalition of states they will get, as you can see, they got Massachusetts and Connecticut and Rhode Island to team up with them. And the parts of Massachusetts that are in modern-day Maine, no one lived here at this time, so they are going to fall to New Hampshire very easily, and very quickly. The southern part of Massachusetts, that's actually Massachusetts, has probably, I think, more people than these three states combined, so it's going to be a tough battle for them. But it's definitely one they could win. However, New Hampshire has lost a lot of its coastline already as Massachusetts is invading and liberating Maine. They also start to capture large portions of Rhode Island and Connecticut. So, as of now, it's anyone's game as to who could win. Connecticut starts invading into the western unpopulated parts of Massachusetts, as does New Hampshire, allowing them to reconnect and kind of force Massachusetts to only the east. But Rhode Island has completely fallen. And during the war, Massachusetts basically seizes the governor of Rhode Island and forces them to change their constitution so that they can't exist, and basically gets rid of any government of Rhode Island and really incorporates it into Massachusetts pretty well, so that after the war, it's really going to be difficult to revive Rhode Island, and Connecticut announces they will just annex Rhode Island if they win the war, which makes New Hampshire a little bit angry at them, but whatever. Because Massachusetts is pushing into Connecticut. They've cut these states off from each other again, and New Hampshire is also losing. Maine, the parts of Maine that are actually technically part of Massachusetts, is just neutral because they don't really care. But New Hampshire is suffering. Basically, their entire population is under occupation, and Connecticut is also suffering. Eventually, they convince New York to basically threaten Massachusetts into a peace negotiation, so that's what ends up happening. All that Massachusetts gets is an official recognition of their claims over Rhode Island, because New York kind of forced them, since New York is stronger than Massachusetts at this point. However, Maine is annexed by New Hampshire as compensation for the fact that it was basically completely occupied and because no one cared about Maine. South Carolina will be invading west. So South Carolina is invading into Georgia. Well, technically, this is South Carolina breaking their alliance with Georgia. I'm going to call her Georgia Blue because Massachusetts is on South Carolina's side. So the north of Georgia will fall pretty quickly, and Georgia begs for help. And they actually will be able to get help in Virginia, who doesn't like how powerful South Carolina's getting, and so tries to get the North Carolinians to rebel from South Carolina, but their cultures are close enough that they don't really care at this point that they've been occupied, so South Carolina just kind of ignores that North Carolina is being invaded because the South Carolinians don't care, but that kind of makes the North Carolinians upset, and now they don't like South Carolina. However, Georgia is being destroyed because the Virginian distraction didn't work. However, Virginia is consistently invading into South Carolina. So it's like weird. The war is just everyone moving southward. Eventually, Georgia is fully capitulated, but they never surrender because they're hoping Virginia will bail them out. And so now South Carolina can start directing their forces northward. And South Carolina, minus its occupation forces in Georgia, is roughly equivalent to the power of Virginia. So after a little while, they stop being able to fight each other. Massachusetts will officially start sending their own troops. They've always been sending supplies with their own troops to South Carolina, and that helps them a little bit. They get a little bit of their land back, but Virginia is still occupying a bit of North Carolina. And so eventually they'll just agree to end the war. And Virginia will get a bit of land in exchange for South Carolina getting all of Georgia. And these are the new borders. Massachusetts will be invading northwest. So Massachusetts is really angry at New York for basically threatening to get rid of them. And so now they have a new governor who basically campaigned on revenge against New York for what they did, and so that they're going to try and invade New York. And their invasion will start off going pretty well, as they're in upstate New York and Vermont, where no one really lives, especially at this point. Actually, more people probably would have lived there proportionally at this point. But New York City is obviously going to be where most of the population is, as well as New Jersey. So for now, New York just kind of lets this happen and focuses most of their energy on preventing them from getting further south. And New York will get a friend in this, in Connecticut, who starts liberating Rhode Island from Massachusetts, and then kind of just sits there and lets New York deal with most of it. New Hampshire also joins in on this war, and at this point, Massachusetts is getting removed from the upstate New York territories they were occupying, and basically just Massachusetts has ruined their relations with everyone. South Carolina tries to help them out, but it's way too far away to actually be able to. And these are the new borders of what used to be Massachusetts. I'm not sure if I portrayed this accurately on the map. But Boston is split between New York and New Hampshire, and then Connecticut gets what used to be Rhode Island. Virginia will be invading southeast. So Virginia is invading into South Carolina. And I think we might forget this nowadays, but Virginia was like half the U.S. population. It wasn't actually half, but it was a lot of the U.S. population in let's say this takes place in 1776. So Virginia was like half the U.S. population, and so they're gonna maybe be able to take out South Carolina. So they'll start invading, and North Carolina is really easy to invade because South Carolina doesn't really care about losing it. They care about losing their main territory. And at this point, the North Carolinians are kind of helping the Virginians invade because they are really upset at the way they've been treated. So North Carolina's been taken. South Carolina and Georgia are still, there. And at this point, South Carolina will start actually holding off the Virginians. And they want to get reinforcements. Unfortunately, no one else really likes them, with the exception of Maryland, who would love to see Virginia weakened, because if you think about it, Massachusetts was allied to South Carolina. New York was anti-Massachusetts. Pennsylvania is allied to New York. Maryland doesn't like Pennsylvania. Therefore, if Virginia doesn't like South Carolina, Maryland also doesn't like Virginia. Hopefully you followed that. Anyway, Maryland will start invading, and they'll do impressively well. They've been building up their army silently for the past while. Also, West Virginia, which already has a different culture to Virginia, even now, will also kind of just rebel. Honestly, this is not like being invaded, so I'm gonna color it in purple so you can tell it's like a different thing. But these guys kind of want independence from Virginia as West Virginia, and this will allow for obviously South Carolina to start pushing back against Virginia in a big way, and Virginia's starting to get cornered as their territory starts to be entered, and soon Virginia proper territory, not just North Carolinian annexed territory, will be entered. So Virginia's kind of panicking, and the West Virginian rebels are demanding independence, and Virginia refuses to give it, and that only makes things worse. But fortunately, Virginia manages to convince Pennsylvania to actually join the war. They've always been friendly with each other, but now they actually are fighting alongside each other. Immediately, Maryland is cut off from the West Virginian rebellion, and all of a sudden, rebellions from the rebellion pop up. It turns out Maryland was definitely supplying that rebellion, and people in West Virginia, not all of them wanted to be independent, and that thing just kind of collapses within itself as soon as Maryland's broken from it. And now Maryland is worried, but South Carolina basically says don't surrender, because if you surrender, we're not going to bring you back after the war, but if you do surrender, we will. Or if you surrender, we're not going to bring you back. If you don't surrender, we will. So Maryland will fall, but with the promise of South Carolina bringing them back. And South Carolina is still winning on the southern front for now. But now all the troops that were in Maryland are going to be redirected to South Carolina. South Carolina knows they only have one chance to capture Richmond, which is about here, or it's all over. So they start basically moving their troops without much purpose. They unintelligently move their troops, and they do actually manage to capture the city, and the entire state of Virginia is like, oh no, what are we gonna do? But the government had already left Richmond. They're fled to like Harrisburg or something. So that specifically isn't actually a big problem like South Carolina thought it would be. And instead, now that all these troops are here, they start threatening to encircle a whole bunch of South Carolinian troops. And they start having to be moved through this area where there's like troops guarding both sides of it. And because this area is so thin, they can't actually move all the troops through that quickly. And eventually, this area is cut off. Most of the troops got out home, but a few troops are here, and they obviously get cleaned up. And it's a major disaster for South Carolina that loses them like war will at home, and all of a sudden North Carolinian rebellions start to pop up away from South Carolina. Virginia is actually like advancing against South Carolina, and at this point South Carolina is very much losing the war as they no longer have any territory that they've advanced into, and the North Carolinian rebellion is happening, and they're worried that Georgia's going to start rebelling, and so they decide to sit down for peace negotiations with the invaders. And these are the new borders after the war. As you can see, Maryland was fully annexed into Pennsylvania. New Hampshire will be uniting. Actually, there's only one state they can unite with. So New Hampshire is uniting with New York. And they will very controversially make their name of their new union New England, which is controversial because Connecticut is also supposed to be part of New England. So Connecticut now hates them. Pennsylvania will be invading Northwest. So Pennsylvania will be invading into New England. And New England was not ready for this, so obviously the upstate part of their state that not many people lived in this time is definitely not happening. Like, no one's there. No one's there, and it just gets invaded. The New Jersey parts are also invaded, although it's much more difficult because it's just so populous. And obviously New York is suffering more, but they're okay with this. Like, they're okay that New Hampshire is kind of not suffering as much. And also, like, yeah, Massachusetts will actually start a rebellion from New England at this point, and all of a sudden Connecticut will even join the war. So yeah, let's just say New England is not doing very well. They need allies, and they don't have any allies. But they do actually have one state that might be willing to help them, and that state is South Carolina. So South Carolina will start sending troops to New York. They make a landing over here, which is really helpful because it kind of starts to split Pennsylvania from Connecticut, which could help the thing. The Massachusetts rebellion is also quelled, which means Connecticut's invading, occupying forces are also there, or the only thing that's there, and Rhode Island is seized. So New England's actually doing pretty well until Virginia joins the war. Not only do they distract South Carolina, because, yeah, and, like, South Carolina's pretty much, this is the end, but also, they also start sending troops up into New York to just ensure that this is the end. So Connecticut takes this back. Massachusetts is no longer in rebellion, but they're now occupied. New Hampshire tries to leave the Union, but they can't. And these guys don't let them because they just don't. And instead, they are forced to surrender. Down in South Carolina, they will also surrender. And as you can see, Connecticut has annexed almost all of New England. Oh, and this is what South Carolina looks like now. South Carolina will be invading Southwest. They don't like that they lost Georgia. And they will be invading into Virginia. And I don't know what they were on when they thought this was a good idea, because although they actually get impressively far, Virginia is the strongest state in the country at this point, and this doesn't last long. However, the two northern states kind of break their relationship with Virginia because they think Virginia is getting too powerful and might want to unite everyone, and neither of those states want to lose their independence, so they are pretty upset about it. Connecticut will be facing a rebellion. So Massachusetts will be rebelling from Connecticut, and it's rumored that these rebellions are being sponsored by Virginia. So obviously, they're going to be able to quell this rebellion fairly easily, and they even get some help from Pennsylvania. And then they decide that they want to use this as an excuse to declare war on Virginia. So, yeah, Not exactly what you would have expected to happen, but I needed this to happen. So Virginia is quickly going to lose West Virginia. The West Virginians kind of let themselves be invaded because they realize an organized rebellion is just not as good as actual occupying forces. So they don't need any. And it's surprising how quickly these guys get into Virginia, given that Virginia is stronger than them combined. But they just have better logistics here. South Carolina also rebels, and Massachusetts actually will try rebelling once again. Massachusetts just really doesn't like not being independent, and this time it's put down for good. I don't want to say how, but not in a good way. Upstate New York will start rebelling. New York City actually is completely fine with this. They legitimately could not care less about being annexed. But upstate New York is very upset. New Hampshire is also marginally upset, but less so. And these rebellions are going to help Virginia push back, but they also have to deal with their South Carolinian rebellion, which they do okay with, but it takes them longer to deal with than it takes these guys to deal with their rebellions because it's way more organized. So in that time, these guys are able to push further south. And then it's revealed that a large number of the troops that Virginia is conscripting, like almost half of them, are from specifically South Carolina and Georgia. And they're doing that because they want to shield their own population from how bad the war is, even though Richmond has been captured. They've definitely liberated Richmond. They probably wouldn't even let it get captured in the first place. I just forgot where it was for a sec. The South Carolinians and Georgians, who used to hate each other, are now united in their hatred of Virginia. And rebellions in southern Georgia will start popping up. Let's just say things are not going as well for Virginia as they thought, because Virginia is losing some of their western lands at this point because they didn't try to defend them. But they do get a successful offensive into Maryland, who doesn't like them, but also doesn't like Pennsylvania. But Maryland hates Virginia more, and so they resist their occupation decently, especially since they've kind of been brainwashed into liking Pennsylvania. However, in the South, the rebellion is kind of just allowed to exist. The reason they allowed the rebellion to exist is because it's easier than dealing with it. And so pretty much all of Georgia is an open rebellion, and another rebellion erupts in South Carolina, and they just kind of ignore it. But all of a sudden, a lot of the people in their army defect, and this is really bad because basically their entire Maryland occupying force defects, and now Richmond is captured again, and Virginia can't really stop it. The rebellion starts marching upwards, and Virginia can't really stop that, and eventually they just lose their whole state. And Virginia has been divided, so the main Virginian land goes to Pennsylvania, and then Georgia gets its land back, and South Carolina is revived, with North Carolina as part of it. Georgia will be invading. There's only one state they can invade, but I actually happen to roll northeast anyway. So Georgia's invasion of South Carolina will start off going pretty well, but then South Carolina shows them why they shouldn't have done that because South Carolina is far stronger, and they start invading. But Pennsylvania doesn't really want a strong South Carolina on their border, so they start helping out Georgia by invading in to South Carolina. The thing is that Virginia is basically uses this as an opportunity to rebel, and Pennsylvania has to focus on quelling that rebellion. So Georgia had done some stuff with the expectation that South Carolina would reduce their troop count, but obviously South Carolina doesn't because Virginia is kind of distracted. And like they have massive logistical failures. It shouldn't have been this bad, but like it's not all Georgia's fault. But yeah, Georgia's probably not going to survive this war. However, Pennsylvania is doing a little bit better. And at this point, there's one thing that's very obviously about to happen, which is Connecticut decides that now's the time to attack Pennsylvania. They seize New Jersey very quickly because they've always claimed New Jersey as theirs. And they start invading into Maryland, which is very difficult. But the Virginian Rebellion is finally crushed. However, Georgia is forced to fully, unconditionally surrendering. Meanwhile, North or South Carolinian troops are pushing up into Virginia, or not, well, parts of Virginia, but it's technically part of Pennsylvania. Upstate New York openly helps people invade into them, as Western Pennsylvania is starting to be invaded, and like Pennsylvania proper. Philadelphia is being besieged as Maryland is taken. So Virginia just goes full on rebellion mode, hoping to get their independence, although if South Carolina has anything to say about it, they won't. And now Pennsylvania looks like this. And Pennsylvania doesn't want to surrender unconditionally. They want to surrender conditionally. But the two invaders say unconditional surrender or else. And so Pennsylvania is cooked. So now there are only 2 states left. Connecticut will be invading Southeast. And they know one thing that South Carolina didn't consider, which is that Virginia likes rebelling. And so they are easily able to push through Virginia, promising Virginia independence if they just win this war. The Virginians, for some reason, believe them, even though Connecticut has no plans to follow through on this. And now the Carolinas are being invaded. And this is going to be a much more difficult invasion, but it is still happening. And it is still worrying that South Carolina is not able to help this. Making things even worse, Georgia starts to rebel. It's not surprising, they keep rebelling over and over again. South Carolina's only hope is more and more rebellions to pop up in the north. A massive Pennsylvania rebellion will definitely help them out, as well as a Massachusetts rebellion. However, Connecticut easily quells Massachusetts because they've been quelled enough times for people to know how to quell them. And as for Pennsylvania, they start focusing on that instead of on South Carolina, which helps South Carolina against them. But they're still only barely holding against Georgia. And unfortunately, as Pennsylvania is being quelled, or as these guys are invading out, Pennsylvania is being quelled. And by the time it's quelled, they've only just barely reached. Virginia has only just barely reached the border. It hasn't even fully reached the border yet. And all the while, the Georgian rebellion is slowly but surely been making progress, and now they're actually in almost to like actual South Carolina. And now Connecticut will just unleash their full wrath. They still are promising the Virginians sovereignty, and until it's revealed that they actually won't. And Virginia tries rebelling from occupation, but then they basically reiterate they weren't actually going to give Virginia full sovereignty, but they say, hey, we were actually going to give you, like... South Carolina's also being cooked while this is happening. Although, so is Connecticut. Connecticut's like, we were going to give you, like, autonomy within ourselves if you'd help us. And some Virginians, especially in the West, actually care about that, but most of them are like, nuh-uh. And they actually help South Carolina cut these guys off. However, unfortunately... Despite Virginia's resistance to Connecticut's cause, Connecticut is powerful enough that it doesn't matter, and eventually this will be the end. And so Connecticut has actually won. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.